Hello and welcome once again to Entry Level Esports. My name is Trent, and on this show I take your questions from Twitter about the world of esports, and I mold them and shape them into wonderful esports knowledge that we can all share and grow in together. Today we've got a question from @Sabby_8515, who asks, how does the competitive scene help form the meta, and was there always untapped potential? And this is a question that has been asked a couple of times, so I wanted to kind of break it down into several of its component parts so that we can kind of address every aspect of this question in one episode instead of taking 3 or 4 weeks to do so. So the three questions that kind of are formed around the idea of the pro scene forming the meta, how to find picks within a meta, there's sort of three questions that we need to break down within that. The first is, what is a meta? Defining the concept of a meta, what it entails, every aspect of it. The second is, how do new picks get discovered? How do pros, casual players, how do people figure out what new heroes, what new map strategies to try out to shape a meta? And then the last question that gets asked a lot and debated a lot within the Heroes community is, why should the Heroes of the Storm team balance around the professional scene? And we're going to take each of those in turn today. So the first question we want to answer is, what is a meta? What makes a meta? When players talk about the new meta or how the meta is really aggressive right now or the meta is double support, what does that mean? And really, the meta is just the widely accepted best strategies for both map play and hero picks. So it's the optimal way to play a specific map, as well as the heroes that are strongest in the draft at that point in time. So for example, the meta on Warhead Junction has been optimized by North America to be these cheesy double boss strategies with Zarya and things like that. That is the meta for Warhead Junction, whereas North America is weaker on Tomb of the Spider Queen because we haven't found the optimal meta for how to play that map. But the meta is more often referred to when talking about hero picks and which picks are strong right now, which heroes are weak right now, and how that changes and evolves. And in reality, the meta changes anytime a player or a team discovers something new that's good. And this happens constantly, where picks suddenly rise up to prominence and become high priorities, and then after a couple patches or a couple tournaments will disappear completely and we won't see them again for 6 months. And often it's kind of hard for players who are maybe playing at a bronze or silver level or only playing in quick match to understand why it is that the pros are prioritizing different picks at different times. And one of the reasons for that is that the meta is different at every level of play. Because remember, we're talking about the widely accepted best strategies. And at the pro level, the widely accepted best strategies are formed after hours of practice in solo queue, playing in scrims, playing in tournaments, watching what other regions are doing. So there's a lot of data that goes into forming the meta at the professional level, whereas in, say, Silver League solo queue, you have a completely different meta because those players don't spend as much time watching the professional scene, and they're really only experiencing the things that are plaguing them at that level of play. This is one of the reasons why Garrosh had to be changed. Garrosh was not an overpowered pick in competitive play at the professional level. He was strong, but he was by no means a first pick, first ban hero. Whereas in solo queue, especially at lower levels, he was banned every single game because lower level players didn't have a clue how to deal with his pull in and flip combo. They didn't know how to position properly. And so Garrosh felt like a broken hero, even though he maybe wasn't necessarily overpowered, but he was strong in that meta. And this happens in a wide array of games. Basically, metas are formed based on experiences rather than they are on empirical data. Because what's strong on paper isn't always what's strong in practice, because you have to take player skill into account. And this is something that happens a lot in fighting games in particular. If you look at Super Smash Bros. 4, Smash for Wii U, the very best player in the world for the last 2 years has been a player named Zero who uses Diddy Kong. And for a long time, people thought that Diddy Kong was one of the top 3 best characters to pick in that game because Zero was winning every single tournament with Diddy Kong. And over time, what you've seen, if you look at a chart of tier lists in Super Smash Bros., you'll see Diddy Kong slowly fall down those tier lists because what we're finding is nobody else can win a tournament with Diddy Kong. There's no other players that are strong enough to take Diddy Kong and consistently win tournaments with it. And what we've discovered is that Diddy Kong is not necessarily incredibly strong as a character when you look at his frame data, his abilities, what he provides in Super Smash Brothers. It's that Zero as a player is so good and his skill set lends itself to the strengths of Diddy Kong that he makes Diddy Kong appear stronger than he actually is. And this is what happens a lot in lower level metas, is that what the really good players in your division play appear to you to be the strongest picks. And so all of these different things go together to form a meta. So if that's how a meta is formed, the next question we have to ask is, how do new picks get discovered to help craft that meta? And for the pro scene, new picks get discovered by a player considering something is strong, trying it out in solo queue, testing it in their private scrims in practice with their team, and then utilizing it in a professional game. And that whole process will then ultimately reveal whether or not that hero is strong. You might try something out in solo queue, feel like it's doing really well because other players don't know how to deal with it, try it out in a couple of scrims against a weaker team, and because you're a stronger team, you just sort of perform better, and then you try it out in a professional game against the best team in the league, and they stomp it because they know how to counter it. Alternatively, you might try something out in solo queue, realize it's strong, try it out in a couple scrims, have success with it, try it out in a pro game, and completely obliterate the other team because they have no answer to that hero, and suddenly you start seeing every other team experiment with that hero and try to perfect it, try to find counters for it, and suddenly the meta changes. And there's a couple of different factors that will make a player want to experiment with a new pick. The most obvious of these is balance changes. You know, if a hero gets nerfed, people are going to try using it less. If a hero gets buffed, everyone is going to try it out for a couple of days. And if it turns out that those buffs actually made that hero stronger, then they're going to use that in scrims and they're going to use that in the pro scene. Synergies are also a way that new heroes rise up. This was especially common when we had the stunlock meta year or so back, where in the stunlock meta, Muradin, Diablo were the high priority warriors because stuns lasted for so long and you could layer your stuns so effectively, and that was really how teams were getting kills and were finding their strength. And in that meta, Tyrande became a very, very strong pick, not because Tyrande as a hero independently was very, very strong, but because in the stunlock meta, being able to layer her stun on top of a Diablo flip, a Muradin stun, whatever other stuns were in that meta, became very, very strong and very reliable as a kill setup. And so you saw Tyrande rise in popularity, and as soon as the stunlock meta went away, you saw Tyrande completely disappear from the professional scene because that synergy was gone. The hero independently was not strong, but the meta at that time allowed for that hero to be strong. The other way is that a player might just see it in another region. Teams copy off of what is successful, and they absolutely should do that. You should learn from each other. It's very important to watch better players and learn from them and adopt those strategies into your own practice. So one of the biggest examples of this is Tyrael at BlizzCon 2015. Team Dignitas was really the only team that was using Tyrael successfully at that tournament. And if you look at the professional scene in North America before that BlizzCon, we never used Tyrael. We didn't think Tyrael was a good pick. We didn't think he could solo tank. If you asked King Caffeine and all the other Warrior players in 2015 in North America, they would have put Tyrael pretty low on their priority list of Warriors. But after we got to BlizzCon, we saw Dignitas obliterating other teams with Tyrael to the point where in every single match of Grand Finals, Cloud9 banned Tyrael with their first ban because they had no answer for it. They had never seen a team play Tyrael at that level, and they had no way to prepare for it. And after BlizzCon of that year in 2016, we saw teams picking Tyrael more frequently. We saw Tyrael show up more in solo queue. We saw the overall North American Heroes of the Storm community suddenly start respecting Tyrael as a strong pick because they'd seen it be successful. And to break away from what we're talking about in this bulleted list right this second, the other question that's been asked a number of times is, how does the competitive scene inform the meta at all levels of play? And it's really a microcosm of this concept of watching other regions and employing what they use. The pro scene is spending the most time investigating the meta and trying to discover new ways to evolve the meta. They've thought of 90% of the things that you or I would think of to bring a hero into solo queue or into quick match or into team league. They've considered Gazlo, they've considered Nova, they've considered the Lost Vikings, and they've likely tested a number of those things, especially during balance patches, new meta shifts, those sorts of things. And so, logically, if you are a player looking to get an edge, looking to find new heroes to add to your repertoire, the best place for you to look is what's being picked in the pro scene, because those are the picks that have been refined and tested and proven throughout hours and hours of practice to be strong. And so in a game that is healthy and has a competitive scene that's respected, you will see most commonly when a new pick is chosen in the professional league, it will eventually trickle down to every level of play. And so over the course of 2018, if you're playing Silver League solo queue and suddenly you see a pick, let's say Lunara, you've never seen a Lunara for the last 6 months, and all of a sudden every single game you're playing has a Lunara in it, and there's been no balance changes to Lunara, it's probably because Lunara started getting picked in the pro scene and having lots of success, and players are trying to incorporate what was seen in the pro scene into their own play, because the pros have figured out that something is strong for one reason or another. And then the last way that I find entertaining, and that answers the other question that was asked by the original question asker, is new skins. A lot of times, just having a cool new skin will make players want to try a hero and see them in a new light. And there are a couple of examples of this in Heroes of the Storm, but the very best and most perfect example of this happening is in League of Legends with the skin Pulsefire Ezreal. So Ezreal is an AD carry hero that attacks from long range. He's got a lot of mobility. Nowadays, Ezreal is constantly a priority pick in the meta. He's often been ban-worthy. He's a pick that allows for AD carries to have playmaking potential. He's widely regarded as one of the best carries in a lot of metas over the last several years. In Season 2 and Season 3, Ezreal was considered a terrible hero. Nobody picked him. There were videos made by pro players showing why players that picked him were dumb, why he brought no value to a team fight. And Ezreal didn't ever have any real significant balance changes. He wasn't really buffed. But what happened was Riot released this skin, Pulsefire Ezreal, which was their first dynamic skin. It started out as not that impressive a skin, and then as you leveled up, the skin got new armor, the gun got bigger, the skin had cool voiceovers, the recall animation got cooler. The skin was amazing. It was easily the best skin in the game for a hero that nobody played. And so, because the skin was so cool, pros played it in solo queue, because they wanted to use this cool skin that they hadn't gotten to use before. And then they started having success with Ezreal because they were respecting Ezreal more, and they wanted to be successful with Ezreal so that they could use this cool skin. And then Ezreal was seen constantly in the pro scene and is to this day. There were no balance changes to Ezreal that made him a stronger pick. It just was that the pro scene saw him in a new light because of this skin. And so they decided to try him out and saw success and started picking him. And the reality is this can happen in any game. There very well could be strategies that the pros haven't thought up yet or don't respect because they've tried them a couple patches ago and they weren't strong. And it might be that a new skin or a new video or something comes up without any balance changes whatsoever that suddenly make that pick strong. So if you're finding yourself having success with a hero that nobody else is having success with, it very well may be that 6 months from now, that hero is getting picked all the time and you were ahead of the curve. So if you're picking Gazlowe every game and winning, hold on to hope. Maybe you're not a terrible person. Maybe you're just 6 months ahead of your time. Probably not, though. Gazlowe is very bad. So the last question we want to answer is that why should the HOTS dev team balance around the pro scene? This is a debate that comes up a lot. A lot of Heroes players express frustration that the balance team only cares about the pro scene, that the support changes did not need to happen because other levels of play were not experiencing the issues that the pro scene was experiencing with double support, and it was ridiculous that the dev team chose to make that balance change only because it was influencing the pro scene. Now, before I argue the case for this decision-making, I want to put a giant most of the time across the screen right now so that you understand that this only applies most of the time. Are we all good on that? Did we read that? Okay. So, the dev team needs to balance around the pro scene for a couple of reasons. First, the pro scene, as we've talked about earlier, is showing the correct way to play Heroes of the Storm. Now, one thing that a lot of people like about Heroes of the Storm is that there's not really a correct way to play because Quick Match teaches you that lie. It's not actually true. In every video game that's got a competitive component, there's a correct way to play. There's a strongest way to play. There's a way to play the game that is most consistently going to give you wins if your goal is to win. And the pro scene, because in order to keep their jobs, they have to win, they are the ones spending the most time figuring out the things that will most consistently win. As a result, those are the correct things to balance around on paper because the pros have tested everything. They've tested 99% of strategies, of map mechanics, of hero picks, and compositional combinations, so they know what's strong and what's not. So, if you want an actually balanced game, you want to balance around the pro scene because they're unveiling the things that are actually broken and the things that actually have counterplay. Because there's a difference between something being broken and something being strong. Something that's strong has counterplay. And counterplay is actually really interesting. There's an amazing video by the Extra Credits guys about perfect imbalance in games like Heroes of the Storm and League of Legends, where you don't actually want every single hero to be equally as strong as every other hero, because then there's no opportunity for counterplay and for the meta to evolve. And that's how you actually get a stale meta. When everything is perfectly balanced, there's still going to be things that are best just because of how their kits are designed or what players play them the best, because you have to take the human element into account. So you're actually only ever going to see the 7 picks that you see. And this is what happens in a game like Super Smash Bros. Melee. There's no balance patches. Everybody's figured out the game, and you see 6 of the 12 to 20 something viable characters in that game. You see 6 of them in every single tournament because everybody's figured out that those are the ones that are strong and those are the ones that we can play and find success with, and those are the only things that get picked. So you don't actually want the game to be perfectly balanced, and you don't want the devs to be designing with that goal in mind. What you want them to be doing is looking at the pro scenes and saying, okay, these are the things that are constantly being picked. These are the things that are never being picked. We need to balance these things over here so that they can be brought in line with these other things. And we want to bring these things down a little bit so that we see a change in the meta. Now, again, we've got this most of the time that we're bringing into effect because it's okay for some things to just be noob stomp heroes that don't see competitive play. This is something that happened a lot in Overwatch early on, because players at lower levels will just, by playing the game, by necessity, get better at the game. If you play 1,000 games of solo queue or even quick match, you're going to be better at playing the game, even if you're not paying any attention and you're not trying to get better. And what was happening in Overwatch was that, what's his name, the machine gun guy. Everybody yell at me about that in the comments, because it's ridiculous that I don't remember his name. But he was obliterating noobs. Bastion. Nobody had an idea how to deal with Bastion at all. Noobs were getting ripped to shreds, going on Reddit and complaining that he was completely broken and that there was absolutely no way to deal with him and he needed to be nerfed. Pros were never picking him. They never picked Bastion because he wasn't very good, because you just go behind him and he can't do anything. They had found the counterplay. However, Blizzard had to balance the hero in a different way than they would balance most things around the competitive scene, because in competitive play, he actually needed buffs. He needed changes to be a better hero so that the pro scene would pick him. But if they did that, new players would quit the game because the hero would be so broken that they'd never be able to beat him. And so what they had to do was they had to rework the hero so that he was a little bit more in line with what the pro scene wanted to do, but he wasn't as strong at lower levels, but he still had that counterplay. And this is the thing that I think a lot of lower level players need to understand about playing a MOBA game. Counterplay is just always going to be a thing. And often the problem is not necessarily that a hero is broken, it's that you haven't figured out how to play around it. We'll go back to our Garrosh example. Garrosh was not broken. There was nothing broken about Garrosh before his rework. He was not an overpowered hero. Players were just bad. And it's okay for players to be bad, but it's not okay for players to complain about a hero being broken when they haven't learned that you can just stand further away, or you can hold your mobility cooldowns until he's going to use those around when he's got his pull up. That's counterplay. If you don't get flipped, Garrosh is not that good a hero. So, because of all of these different factors, really the only useful data for the dev team is the pro scene. This is the only place where they're getting an actual true picture of the balance of their game, because the pros are really the only ones that are taking counterplay to the highest level. So as a result, the things that are actually broken, the things that are actually too weak, the things that are actually in a really good place are going to be seen most and have the most data at the highest levels of play. So this is why we have our most of the time. In most cases, the correct balancing decisions are going to be the ones based around top-level play, except when you have situations like Garrosh or like Bastion, where players just cannot figure out the counterplay, and it's ruining the experience at low levels. So you have to do something to allow those players to still have fun. They may be incorrect, but if they feel that bad and they're not going to learn the counterplay, occasionally you have to do something. But overall, the correct balance of the game, the correct picture of what's strong and what's not, is most often going to be seen in the professional scene. And so the dev team should take that into account most of the time. So I hope that answers every aspect of the question that was asked. If you would like to get your question answered on the next episode of Entry Level Esports, make sure to follow at TrollsGG and myself at Trent_Esports so that you can reply to the tweet that we send out every week asking for questions. If you've sent in questions before, I do keep all of the questions in a document. So I have read your question. I've considered doing an episode on it, and I may be saving it for another week where it's more topical, or somebody else just asked a better question than you. So find a better way to phrase your question, ask a different question, or just hold on to hope that one week your question will be answered. Until next time, this has been Entry Level Esports, and we will see you next week.